We're here today on That's How Every Empire Falls with director Jen Senko and journalist and author Steve Matteo. It is going to be a bit of a conversation about the right-wing media ecosystem. Steve, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Trevor?
Excellent. And Jen,
I'm doing good, thanks.
let's have Steve give a little more of a bio for Jen.
Okay. Jen Senko is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and truth in media activist. She has directed Roadmap Warrior Women, The Vanishing City, and the movie we're going to mostly be talking about today, The Brainwashing of My Dad, which was released in 2016 and narrated by Matthew Modine. And it's about her father's radicalization by the right-wing media. And this is a perfect topic. it's I almost wish we weren't having this conversation today. 8 years after this film came out, and 8 years after a certain person became president for the first time. Um, but here we are again. So maybe just for those of the people who are out there who are listening, who maybe are not aware of the film, or maybe they remember it, but it's been so long. You just talk a little bit about what gave you the idea to do it, and how it came about, and the process, and the success of it. I mean, it was a very successful film, and many people do know about it, and it won awards too.
Yeah. It may be winning another award right now because it's in a film festival called the Daddying Film Festival, which it's up for, I think, best feature, something like that. So fingers crossed.
Okay.
Um, is essentially the film lays the foundation uh, for understanding how right-wing media became a propaganda machine. I mean, that was the purpose of it. And what we're seeing now is just that machine evolving into all these new forms, podcast, sanitized federal messaging, etc. And it's media shaping possibly. Um, so yeah, it may sound bratty to say I told you so. And maybe it is, but I did try to warn people back in 2016 with my film, and then again in the book that I wrote by the same name that came out in 2021. It started as a personal journey just to figure out what the heck was happening with my dad, who changed, his personality changed, from a mild, open-minded Democrat to a like almost evangelical, not the religion evangelical, rabid, radical right-wing Republican. So, you know, in so the film was a lens into how right-wing media radicalized not just him, but an entire country. And in doing the film, I realized it wasn't organic. It was an intentional, part of a massive psyop. Um, and so I could go into a little bit more detail if you want.
Yeah, I mean, would you say that, just to give people a sense of when we say right wing media, now it's such a large thing, but at that time, would you say the two sort of driving forces were um, talk radio and Fox News?
E- At that and email. Okay. So yeah, and it started back in the 90s. So because I saw my dad's transformation, I wanted to figure out, what was going on. And uh he was listening to Rush Limbaugh, and that was making him change. Um, but then a little later, he started forwarding all these emails, which seemed like casual, like wisdom from some regular guy just stating common sense things, but really they were loaded with like anger and designed to make liberals and Democrats sound like the enemy, like the liberals are waging a war on Christmas and that the elite latte liberals were forcing you to change, to be more sensitive to black people, to women, gay people, the environment. It was a perfect message to strike at the heart and the ego of older white men. And my dad was in that category. Um, so yeah, I just watched a lot of this happening and I saw it happening to friends and oh, and then also in 2014, that PSYOP expanded, it got worse when Russians stepped in. I think they thought, well, who's going to notice? It's going to blend right in. Um, and Limbaugh had proven that you could make a ton of money selling right-wing outrage. And if you were lucky, you got funded by think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, or eventually the Russians. So it did start out, though, with talk radio. I know this is a long-winded answer to your question. It did start out with talk radio, a hate radio, really Bob Grant and others, and then expanded into Fox. But all the while, around the same time Fox came out, that's when email came out, and I noticed those emails, and that's when it was a wake-up call to me, like, oh my goodness, something sinister is afoot. What the heck is happening?
Can you just explain sort of the difference between right-wing media, mainstream media, and left-wing media?
Okay. Well, first of all, when I hear left-wing media, I
I
sort of,
mean, I would argue that there are certainly published uh, publishing outlets that are left-wing.
yeah,
The Nation, Mother
left-wing media.
Jones, they exist. I just
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to clarify that there is a left-wing media, but also a mainstream media, and that there's a difference.
yeah. What I call mainstream media, I mean, I call mainstream media really like corporate media. So, it's responsible, beholden to its shareholders, the advertisers. And it tends to be a little right-leaning because the CEOs that own the corporate media, usually benefit from these big tax breaks and from media deregulation. They can buy more media. Um, and right-wing media has a clear purpose, and it's to stir up emotion, to divide people, to disinform people, to create chaos, all to serve what started out as like these wealthy white white guys, the ultra wealthy white guys that didn't want to share um, any power. They've been resentful since FDR, and gradually it started off in the 50s. They figured out a way to their whole goal was to have one party rule, um, and actually that's kind of what's happening now. Um, So yeah, that's the right-wing media. It had a purpose, and its main purpose was to divide and enrage people and make Democrats and liberals seem like the spawn of Satan.
It is interesting that this film comes out probably even before Trump announced that he was running, I believe. Was that the timing of it?
Well,
Or had he announced yet?
well, no, when I started the film, that was in 2013. We didn't know he was going to announce.
Right,
But
right.
near the end of the film, at the end of no, at the very beginning of 2016, he was running, and
Okay.
we found one last picture to insert in the last part of the movie. And it was Trump, and then this adoring crowd looking up at him, like a woman in particular, like he was Jesus. And we paid $300 for that picture to get it inserted, but it was worth every penny.
It is so interesting, really, the timing of the film. And I just wanted to go back to something that you said before, and you didn't kind of finish what you were saying. So in 2014, you're talking about the Heritage Foundation being one of the think tanks funding these right wing people, and then you made a reference to Russia, if I'm
Mhm.
not mistaken. So could you kind of clarify and expand on that?
Yeah, yeah, that's when, like, there was Hillary and Bernie, right? And Russians didn't want Hillary. Oh, wait a minute, I'm getting it mixed up. Whatever it was, they didn't want, yeah, no, no, no. Hillary and Bernie at first. And they were painting Hillary um as, even on their in their media, as feeble, as sick, as evil. They just kind of bandwagoned themselves onto what the right wing media was saying and expanded on it, and would make these pictures, which, like, for instance, when Hillary was doing a debate with it, they photoshopped. I could tell at the time it wasn't a good Photoshop job. And that was kind of like where I was making my money, doing those things at that time. Like a receiver under her shirt, like saying that she was fed the answers, as if Hillary needed to be fed answers. But I had friends that were falling for that. And we were pro Bernie, but I didn't hate Hillary. My friend absolutely hated Hillary, and realizes now, years later, holy shit, that was Russian propaganda that I fell for. Um, and it was their goal was to basically, as we know, weaken America from the inside. So it was just like a tsunami. It became a tsunami with Russia, and then, like Trevor mentioned earlier, the podcasts happening, um, and yeah. So yeah, the Russian thing started around 2014, but I know that back in the 80s, that's when they sort of were grooming Trump, because Trump needed money. He went to Russia. I think he wanted to build something there. Um, So they had this plan all along, and they found an opportunity in 2014 to just, you know, hop on the bandwagon.
I think the other interesting sort of marker and or coincidence is that your film comes out in 2016 on the 20th anniversary of the birth of Fox News. So the timing was sort of perfect in a lot of ways too for that, because as much as it had been mostly AM talk radio, Fox News is really sort of, it becomes the Mount Rushmore for right wing media. I mean, now things have changed, but where you have this entity that it looks like news, it smells like news, it tastes like news, it sounds like news, but
They're
it
all
isn't
very
news.
astute.
It's just propaganda. It's just right wing propaganda. It's what Rupert Murdoch has always done. I mean, I think initially part of Rupert Murdoch wanting to do it was because it followed the kind of media that he's always been about,
Mhm.
where it's shocking people and lowest common denominator and getting down into the gutter and being willing to push things, as far as he can push it. And so, I mean, now almost Fox News is just, it's still significant, but now it's just part of it with Newsmax and OAN and social media. Now, at this time, too, there's the social media, these.
Can I just say something about Rupert Murdoch just before you go on? Didn't mean to interrupt you, but everybody emphasizes that part of Rupert Media. Yeah, he did like to get down in the gutter, but his thing also was to change governments wherever he would go. In Australia where he started out, he managed to change the government because he owned almost, like 80% of the media or something like that. And then once he changed it and then didn't like the guys who were in it, he would use his media and get them out of there. Then he'd go to another country, went to England, and managed to also change Brexit. So he too was interested, I don't think so much as maybe like Roger Ailes really wanted to get this ideology out. But Murdoch kind of, wanted like just to become richer, like deregulation of the media, buy more media, yeah, turn the country to the right for his benefit. Um, yeah.
So
Sorry.
no, no, that's good. It's good. It's important that you talk about that because it is significant that,
Yeah.
yeah, it starts in Australia and then he goes to England, and a lot of the kind of media that he was into fit in perfectly with England anyway because of the Fleet Street media, the way all that was already. So it's easy for him to slide right into that. It wasn't a challenge, and in some respects, it's almost like England. It's such a small country and everything's concentrated in London. So that's really all he had to do was conquer London media, and it was almost simple for him to do it. But the other thing I was going to say was this: at this time when you're making this film, when you're working on this film, we don't have this sort of social media landscape that we have now, especially since Trump has gotten back in the second time. At first, all these tech guys were very sort of, San Francisco hip blue jean guys. Oh, everybody has a voice, and we're into cool music, and the whole sort of beginning of this sort of tech boom is weird because the internet was, the government invented the internet, the ARPANET it was called, and where it all really developed was all these ex hippies in San Francisco. They were all cool and hip, and I wish it was a John Perry
Until they made
Barlow
their first
with the
billion.
right, but with the Grateful Dead. I mean, he was like, he was one of the main sort of cultural forces in the beginning of whatever the internet was, and now it is just another beachhead for right wing media and misinformation and lies and propaganda. And it's even more of an open wild west than anything Fox was or is, or even talk radio. So I'm curious, like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it really metastasized, didn't it? I mean, it originally started out in the 50s after Brown versus Board of Education. Um, these guys, oh God, I always forget his name. Anyway, he was an award-winning economist and he hooked up with Coke, Papa Coke, and they decided plotting like how do we, you know, get the government back to pre-FDR, right? And then then in the 70s, you had the Lewis Powell memo outlining, all these billionaires and big corporations got together, outlining how we take America back. But then you had like, Rush Limbaugh come in, and then other people were like, oh, I can really make money off of this. And then there were billionaires backing them up. And then I, it, and then the tech guys came in, Russia came in. So, and they're all pushing conspiracy theories because they want to confuse people as to what reality is, and so it just gets so scattered and all these there's all these offshoots. So it got crazier than they ever intended.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this on our previous show, but I think, you kind of touch on it a little bit. I mean, a lot of the drivers was oil companies, was, fossil fuel companies,
Mm.
I mean, and a lot of it is, you know, creating misinformation about the environment. But one of the people we talked about on the previous show was Pat Buchanan, who,
Mhm.
people just think, oh, that was that guy that ran for president, you know. Well, before that, I mean, he worked for Nixon, and he was the guy who said to Nixon, we're losing the culture war. We have to fight this culture war. The liberals, the Democrats, the hippies, the left, whatever you want to call it, they had the culture. They owned the culture, the kind of movies that were being made, CBS News, the New York Times, and they were driving the information, you
Okay.
know. And so, Buchanan was one of the people who said we have to figure this thing out. And essentially what he was saying is we have to create our own media, essentially. Now, of course, he didn't see cable TV coming. He didn't see social media and the internet and podcasting and he didn't see all of this stuff coming. But I mean, he was the guy who sort of told these people, hey, this is why we're in the position that we're in, because we're losing. What was the famous saying that the reason the Vietnam War turned was because once Walter Cronkite pointed out to Middle America that this war is wrong.
Yeah.
Once they lost Cronkite, they lost the country. You know,
Yeah.
and so that was a big factor. Nobody saw all of the stuff that we're seeing now,
When did
obviously.
when did Buchanan like whisper in Nixon's ear?
I mean, he didn't really have concrete answers, but he basically, Nixon couldn't understand, you know, why would people listen to these hippies? Who are them? They're spoiled kids. Most of them, they just want to stay out of the war. And he was trying to explain that, it's public relations. Haldeman and Ehrlichman, I believe both of them, they worked in public relations before they were in politics. These guys were just they're selling cans of peas is what they're doing.
Yeah, also Roger Ailes
Right.
met um, Nixon when he was doing the Mike Douglas show back in 71. And, he kind of pulled Nixon aside and said, yo, dude, you're really bad on TV. You need to get TV savvy. And Nixon didn't believe him, but at first, but Roger Ailes convinced him, and he eventually worked in the Nixon White House, coordinating everything from the lighting of the Christmas tree to pull your socks up, man, when you're in a photograph, don't be sweaty. um, but so Roger Ailes, that's when he wrote how to get the GOP onto TV news. And then it was only 1 year after that that the Chamber of Commerce commissioned this corporate lawyer, Lewis Powell, to write this whole thing um, about how to take the country back to what they wanted it to be, oligarchs and so forth. And in that was also about the media. So it's just a confluence. Like they were all they all probably talked to each other, all were probably on the same page, smoke-filled rooms with cigars,
Right. At the country
probably really
clubs.
good
Yeah.
cigars.
Right. At the country club reading the National Review. And
Yeah.
Roger Stone was there with Roger Ailes also. And people forget that Roger Ailes was, before he was at Fox, he was actually at MSNBC. He was
Yeah.
actually there before
Yeah.
when they were trying to figure out what they were. Most people forget what MSNBC was a venture between NBC and Microsoft. and they really didn't know what they were doing. They were making some attempt to admit that this internet thing is going to be big, and as you know, legacy media, even though it was cable, we have to figure out where do we fit. And they started out as kind of like this internet news kind of thing. I can't even describe what it was.
Mm.
And then, and Ailes was the one who I believe, brought Joe Scarborough there. And then he left there, and then gradually, of course, MSNBC became the sort of antidote to Fox,
Yeah,
is
especially
because,
when Keith
you know,
Olbermann joined them.
right, exactly. So, it's now maybe it would be great for you too to talk about some of the people that you had in the film, The Brainwashing of My Dad, because you were able to get some great people to talk about what was going on. I mean, my favorite is Noam Chomsky, of course. I mean, he's somebody that's been talking about so much of what we're talking about here. Maybe not so much about the media, but about the oligarchy and all that. I mean, him and Howard Zinn have been talking about this stuff for forever, it seems. So talk about some of the folks that were in the film that you were able to get, and the different points of view that they brought to what you did.
Well, I mean, that was all just amazing. It was like after starting the film, um, you just get on this kind of charmed roll, and like I had done two shorter but successful films before that. And in Vanishing City, we met a lot of people, and those people knew people. So somebody who had helped like write like some of the wording, maybe of a voiceover or whatever. Um, she worked with Noam Chomsky at WBAI. She just assumed I knew him. She said, "Why don't you interview Noam?" I'm like, You mean Noam Chomsky? He doesn't want to be interviewed anymore. He doesn't do documentaries anymore. No, yeah, she said, yeah, but your subject, he writes about media, and I think he'd be very, just type something up and I'll give you his email. I'll tell him you're going to email him. So that's how we got to email him. And he wrote Manufacturing Consent, and um, yeah, he I don't know, he was Gnome, and whatever he said was just great.
Talk
Um,
about some of the other folks that are in the film, because
well, one of my favorites, and he was really hard to get, was David Brock.
a man who went from the dark side to back into the light. Would
And
that be an accurate description?
oh yeah, I love that because um
Maybe you
I
could just tell people who he is, just
yeah,
just so that.
yeah. Okay, so um when Clinton was president, um David Brock was actually hired to be, he and Ann Coulter were hired to be elves, to dig up dirt on Clinton, and especially in this property they own called Whitewater. And so they were actually paid to do that. And then he did a hit job on um oh, what's her name? Oh God. I'm at that age where I forget names.
Well, this is a long time ago. You're talking about the '90s now.
Yeah. No, but when Clarence Thomas was
Oh, Anita Hill.
Anita Hill, right?
Right.
He wrote a hit job on her. Um, and he was as right wing as they come, and it's kind of ironic because he was gay. He was a good writer, but when I went to Sundance one year, maybe it was 2010, because I was working with Bill Plimpton. I was just doing some hand painting of his cells, and I did a couple voiceovers for his couple of his characters. And so I saw this documentary called The Hunting of the President, and David Brock was in it. And he very humbly talked about his evolution and admitted that he was a paid operative. And that's kind of when I said, holy shit, to myself. And, the pieces started coming together, like even more so, like, yeah, this is a vast right-wing conspiracy. And that's what he says in my movie, in my documentary. He said he knew Hillary was right, that this was a vast right-wing conspiracy. So, but he was really, really difficult to get. We couldn't get him until we got um, this one guy, Ryan Smith, a backer. Uh, we met him on Kickstarter. He initially contributed a little bit of money, and then one day he wrote me and said, "What do you need?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What do we need?" you know, well, how much money do you need? I can provide it. So he helped provide the rest of the funds after Kickstarter. So he used to give to Media Matters. So when he called them and said, she wants to interview David Brock. Then I got to interview him. So,
He was a key person, I thought, because
yes,
this is not just somebody who has liberal credentials or whatever. This is somebody who was there while they were making the sausage in the
yeah,
right wing echo chamber, saying, "Hey, it's complete nonsense."
yeah,
And he's
exactly.
like almost like a whistleblower, it's
Yeah,
like a media whistleblower,
yeah.
and so you also had Eric Boehlert was in your
Oh,
film, right?
yeah, I loved him. That's who Media Matters gave us first. Well, you can't have David Brock, but we'll give you Eric Bullard. But Eric Bullard was great. And I think he'd been on Fox a couple times as a commenter. I'm not sure. I know Jeff Cohen was, the liberal commentator.
Right, the token liberal. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but Eric was great. And I remember his one quote really stuck out of my mind about Fox. They make stuff up, like,
Yeah, I want to sort of get you to speak on the difference in factuality between sort of left corporate and right-wing media.
the what? The divisions?
The difference in
Oh,
factuality, how
oh,
much how much each media source is likely to use uh, a fact,
mhm.
not talking about quoting people for opinion, but how much
Yeah,
how much stock you can put in
yeah.
hard facts reported by media.
Um, don't quote me on this, but I think with Fox, it's something like 60 or 70% disinformation. I'd have to research that. But they are at the point where, I mean, they kind of train their audience by saying, you can't trust the other media. And then Trump helped that by calling it fake news. People, people knew they were being lied to somehow, you know, that something was rigged and they weren't getting raises in 20 years and everything. So, um, Fox got to the point where like it would nurture that distrust in other media, and it would kind of color things, maybe exaggerate things, only show one side. And now it's just at the point where it just makes stuff up, you
Mm,
know, pretty much
yeah.
all the time. And then I've heard the thing liberal media has a truth bias. I think, you know, like, okay, let's just take MSNBC, for instance. We know that they they kind of lean left. I mean, they can't go too far because they're a corporation and their new CEO, I don't think she's, I think I heard that she's like right wing. I don't know if I believe that, maybe center right. I don't know. Um, but what they do say is factual. Um, they're pretty stringent about that. But they will give their opinion and they'll say it's their opinion. So that's one of the big differences there. You know, it's definitely their opinion and they're not like just making stuff up whole cloth. Um, Corporate media, um, like my mom watches CNN, so I have to watch a lot of what she watches. So I see them, I feel like I see them trying to be like I feel like the anchors maybe it's it to the cells like maybe lean a little. I don't even like to call it left. I would say maybe lean towards recognizing the truth, but they know that they have to kind of like pretend to present both sides or present both sides. And what aggravates me is when they let someone get away with lying. They've gotten better. They pretty much, I see them pushing back. Maybe they realize what's at stake.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and then you have the podcasters who just say whatever kind of crap they want to say. You know.
And speaking of pushing back, you're listening to WUSB 90.1 in Stony Brook, New York. Our guest today is Jen Senko. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker. We're mostly talking about her film, The Brainwashing of My Dad. And, I loved in the bio somewhere that I read that you're a truth in media activist, which we all should be these days, every single American citizen. And, it's for us, we've been in this for so long, but, sometimes I just think about, and I'm not saying this in a condescending way, I just think about the average person who is inundated with all of this media, and it is difficult to tell what's right, what's wrong, what's the truth, what's being exaggerated, what are theories. One of the things Fox News always did early on was they say, well, sources say. Well,
Yeah,
who are those sources? Oh,
yeah,
the guy in the office next to me.
right.
So there's
Or
truth
they could
in
even
that.
just say sources say,
Right.
and they don't have to.
Right. There's
No.
this truth and accuracy, and it is very muddled. And there are people of a certain age that they've grown up with social media. They never knew a time when there wasn't. There's people who are maybe not that young, but they don't remember a time when there wasn't cable TV. Cable TV, cable news, you know, as a whole changed things so much because it isn't this carefully edited, curated half hour, 5 nights a week, on the networks who have a charter to present both sides and be accurate and are, working in the public interest. I mean, that's the way it used to be. Radio and TV airwaves are owned by the people, and these people have to act in the public interest and have the trust of the public and therefore have to be accurate and give the news whether it's good or bad and has nothing to do with their opinion. So it's almost like the genie is out of the bottle, and I don't know if we're ever going to be able get to a point where you know most people can really discern the difference. And maybe that sounds like some sort of apocalypse. But when you have nearly 80 million people or 75 million people who voted for Trump after we had 4 years of him and he lost, he didn't get reelected. just taking that just by itself, I think is I mean we could have a whole conversation about this in terms of what the Democrats have done wrong or what issues they have with messaging or whatever the case may be. But it's not a happy picture. I don't necessarily see improvement. What do you think? Like, how do you see the landscape right now?
Okay, so I'm both optimistic and pessimistic. Here's where my optimism comes from. My optimism is that people had to see just how bad things could get. That's human nature. They're like the frog who's in the water's getting warmer and warmer, but like, hey, I can still handle it. Once it's boiling, it's like, oh, I'm in deep shit. Yeah, I got that. Like, yeah, I got to get out. And by then it could be too late. I think that's human nature. But I think that what's going to happen is, and what is happening in some cases, is that's going to be more and more evident that they're lying because they're going to see it in real time. Trump is going to tell them, oh, you're fine. The economy's great. The price of eggs are cheaper. And then they're going to see like the curtain being pulled back a little bit, the man behind the curtain. Some will see that, and some already have. And I know it's difficult because they're cult-like. They're in this cult where the leader is always right. And people also don't want to admit they've been tricked or that they were wrong. But when the apocalypse comes and hits them in the face, and they have that kind of like trauma, like what's happening. Maybe something else takes place in their body, which allows, the amygdala, like, uh, just allows their mind to accept maybe new information.
Mm,
That's that's my hope, but at the same time, that's bad because it means we have to really be uh, in horrible shape. We have to, they have to stick their hands in the fire to realize that there's a fire.
mm,
But the hope is at the other end, that the hand won't be too burned, and we'll see. This is like all smoke and mirrors. And, even some of the podcasters are going, yeah, I lost 7 million, you
Yeah,
know.
let's talk about this tariffs issue. Um, it is something that hits the right wing where it usually thrives. They usually have, quote unquote, the advantage in perceptions of the economy. Right now, um, as we speak, most of the tariffs have been lifted after being imposed yet again. A lot of business types, a lot of small business owners are saying, oh, this is bad. How have right-wing media outlets responded to that, everywhere from Fox News to the podcasters? I know probably the most notable example to me of how uh, this crisis might get managed in some cases was Fox for the first time in basically their history taking live updates of the stock market down.
Oh, well, I have one kind of outrageous example. Like I read about it from the um uh from the whatever. It's like a podcast that Decoding Fox. That's what it was.
Jen Jeske, I believe her name is. It is that the name? Juliet Jeske,
I
I
think
think her
that's
name
it.
is. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's it. Anyway, on a day when the markets were tanking, you know, and and absolutely just tanking. Jesse Waters was on his program saying that teams across America are becoming trans. Um, um, I forget why he said why that was. I don't know, maybe because men are such weaklings and this allows them to compete. And, so that's something that they will do. I don't know how. I think some on Fox push back a little bit. And I just think like if they lose, no, Steve's shaking his head no.
no, no, I'm shaking my head. Like this stuff is like, you know, 40 years ago, if someone did something like that,
Yeah.
I mean, they would just pull the plug on the program. But anyway, go ahead, go ahead.
I've seen it
Yeah.
all exist. I've seen them, take down the stock ticker and start saying that losing money is not that bad in the long run,
Yes.
that we should do it for our country. And I've also seen,
Right.
you know, um, fair and balanced luminaries like Steve Ducey talk about how one small business owner might go out of business due to the tariffs. So,
Only one.
well,
Yeah.
I think it was illustrative of what could be happening across the country, but that he was going off of the New York Post report, so that's another Murdoch outlet. Both of those talking about the impacts it could have on small business owners. So I guess at what point it seems as though there's some debate even on those networks whether or not we should be addressing reality as their viewers see it or telling them to close their eyes.
Yeah, you're probably right. There probably is some debate. I mean, especially if they're losing their own 401ks. Janine Pirro said she was losing money in her 401k, but she was hanging tight. Like, okay, well, she gets paid 3 million a year, so she can afford to lose some money in her 401k. But yeah, they must be I mean, because it's like in absolute insanity. It's so obvious that he's destroying America like the wrecking ball. And although they wanted to see a market-based economy, fake market, deregulation, privatization of everything, they probably weren't expecting this much of a wrecking ball, not all of them. Although a lot of what Trump is doing, minus the tariffs, was what was in a Koch manifesto in 1980 when he was running for vice president. But that's the Project 2025. It's not really an old thing. But anyway, yeah, I would think that they would be like what you said, like probably at odds with themselves and maybe even debating with each other what should we do.
I mean, this is why the tariffs have been paused, because he's getting too much backlash from the people who are supposedly on his side. You know,
Mm.
so so maybe what we could do is in our remaining time, end somewhat positively, is talk about media that there is today that you would encourage people to pursue in terms of whether it's people who are on social media, podcasts, radio, television news, films, books, newsletters, Substacks. or whatever hasn't been invented yet, that in a concise way, things that people can look to where they can get good information, where they can, you know, uh, feel that feel confident that they're not being sold a bill of goods or somebody's just creating a platform to expand their brand and get rich. And particularly in the space of media, of people who are commenting on the media and trying to make people aware of what is going on in the media in terms of who is lying to you, who has an agenda. I think sometimes people forget, we get so caught up in all this, that a lot of these people, they're not just lying just to create chaos and conspiracy theories, but there's a financial reason for it. There's money to be made, and they're doing it. There's an end game involved. So given your background, maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, there are some really great. There's a lot more media out there now that is truly independent. You've got obviously like Midas Touch, who are outdoing Fox and um, outdoing some of the podcast guys. I'm not sure who. Trevor probably knows. Um, but I will say this, and I'm sorry if it sounds like a little bit of a brag, but when there was COVID, um, there was a lot of people were doing a lot of things on Zoom, right? And I was showing my film a lot, for free for people. Um, and there was a group that had been for Elizabeth Warren, and after they saw my film, they changed their focus to media, and they became the Media and Democracy Project. So they've got things going on. They were pushing back on the FCC. They're the ones that are always like if you see on Twitter, like rewriting the Times stupid headlines, that
Right.
do with reality. They are the epitome of both sidesism. Um, and I wouldn't even say they're fair to our side. Um, so we've got a lot more awareness now of how important the media is. I don't think people realize like how influential the media could be on us human beings. Um, this is where we get our information. This is how we form our opinions. This is how we form who we are
Who we vote for.
and who we vote for. Yeah. Um, and so there also, I mean, my cousin she's younger than I am. She sends me all these TikTok videos. And
Ah,
there's all these guys out there that are pushing back against Trump and against Fox. And there hasn't been anything like that before. And their followers are growing. Um,
what about what you specifically consume? And again, it can be a film, it can be a book, it can be a podcast, it can be just about anything.
Me, what do I consume?
Yeah, that you in the media space where
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like you mentioned Midas Touch. I mean, yeah, I know about them. I mean, they
yeah,
cover everything. They're not just covering media, they're covering politics, they're covering across
yeah.
the gamut. But I mean, people like you mentioned Eric Bollard. I mean, Eric's not around anymore, and people like that. We don't so many of these people, there have been some people who were like, media theorists or media critics, or we saw like Brian Stelter got fired from
Yeah,
CNN, for example. I mean, he's not the kind of example maybe I'm looking for,
yeah.
but I mean, um, I just think that people who are correcting the perception or enlightening people to how they're having the wool pulled over their eyes by various media, what is out there in terms of books, films, podcasts, people who are the sort of, the go-to, usual suspects
Yeah,
to.
I belong to a couple of podcasts. Like Heidi Kuda has one called Betty Dangerous, and um, she always has people on that are like they're from all over the world, and they're saying, this is what is doing. The protests are still going on. They're this big. Um, and so that's one podcast. I like joining podcasts. There's some others I joined too, Indivisible. Um, and and then, like I said, like all these little videos on YouTube and TikTok. And then as for reading, like I've always sworn by RSN, Reader Supported News. I think they choose articles, like they compile a bunch of articles from different sources, but um, they push back and they're really very good. I like Flux. I think Flux is Matt, Matt Sheffield. He's part of it. Matt Sheffield is another one who used to be a right winger and then, got rescued and saved. Um, I like Lever Reports. Uh, Courier is good. Um, I get Ruth emails from Ruth Ben Giat. I'm looking at some of the emails now. I also love Robert Reich.
Yeah.
I love it. I love his emails.
Yeah.
He does he hits the nail on the head with these videos he has, and just being able to sum things up in a nutshell. Um, and Tom Hartman.
Yes. Excellent.
Tom Hartman rocks it.
Yes, for
And
sure.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
Tom Hartman. And he's number one uh considered like a liberal podcaster.
Yeah.
Um
Just a quick reminder, you're on WUSB Stony Brook 90.1 FM. It's around 10 a.m. and well, if you're looking for alternate sources of media, you're actually consuming one as we speak.
yeah.
Um, I guess I just want to go into we've been talking about media in a more traditional sense for so long. Um, you're mentioning um, you're mentioning so many sources of media that aren't big newspapers. They aren't on the TV. They aren't even on mainstream radio. But we're podcasts, Substack, all that kind of stuff. I'll mention as someone who is a bit more of a traditional centrist, although I would not say that there is a center at the moment for me to throw my lot in with. Um, the Bulwark does a fantastic job talking about the stakes of authoritarianism and democracy without necessarily pushing either left or right as the correct answer. Um, but let me just get back around to the fact that more and more people, especially young people, are consuming alternative forms of media. And at the beginning, you noticed that Fox seemed particularly targeted to older white men. How much are you studying the ecosystem that exists today, uh, primarily on podcasting networks and YouTube, that caters to younger white men?
I don't think that the younger people are even watching like much cable TV. I think that's where they get most of their information from these videos and from the podcasts. That's my impression.
What do you see studying that kind of media? What trends are you picking up on?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. For a while I heard that young people were leaning right, unfortunately. That they were being more influenced by these bros, these guys that are kind of sexist. And I mean, I really hope that's not true. Or I know Democrats are turning out and trying to turn that around, and I hope they're successful. And then also, I think with hope, like, okay, these TikTok guys that I see that are out there, and they're looking for authenticity, right? Or what they perceive to be authenticity. So that's why they're trusting these podcaster guys more. But now there's all these people that know what's happening, like I said, like that do these individual little videos. They're not even podcasters, they just do these short videos like on TikTok, like 2 to 5 minutes long, and they're very good at explaining what's going on and their take on things. And I think that that's bound to kind of maybe counterbalance a little bit of the right-wing podcasters, especially if the podcasters are going to be saying, yeah, I lost $7 million, you
Yeah,
know, and
yeah,
another one is saying, hey, I'm almost losing my farm.
right, exactly. And just a reminder, we're talking to documentary filmmaker Jen Senko. And I saw an article. This was like in the last week, and it was a lot of charts and everything about the last election. And the two takeaways were basically that young people, and because of their getting their news from TikTok, was what swayed the election to Trump. Just that was just enough to do it. And it's scary stuff. I mean, the people at the New York Times, for example, or CBS News or CNN, they must be going out of their minds, because the importance of legacy media, what used to be considered the most, the New York Times, the paper of record, their influence is being really shrinking. And in the case of the New York Times, where so much of their revenue still comes from printing a physical newspaper. I know they've done well in terms of increasing their digital subscriptions, but for them in particular, it must be, frightening in some ways. Do you think that it causes them to um, dilute their product and maybe even give the right a little bit more of a break than they should because of fear of extinction?
I don't know. That's possible and maybe even probable. But if I may uh, do a non sequitur and go back to something you said about t TikTok swaying the election, I have to say, because I firmly believe this, and I think the more somebody has the nerve to say it, the more people will look into it. This last election, um, Republicans always accuse the Democrats of what they themselves are guilty of, and that's a Goebbels thing. I think that they rigged this election, and Trump kind of admits it, and so does Elon. In an interview with Tucker Carlson, and his son is saying all these things that he's saying, like they'll never know, and we're gonna win, and but
Just let me press.
sure,
How would they have rigged the election, and what evidence do you have? I don't want to be
I
a
know,
news source and just allow a claim like that to fly.
and well, you should. So that's what I'm doing now is I'm compiling information. There's a couple videos where you have some computer scientists talking about the particular type of machines, voting machines that are in Pennsylvania that were easy to rig. And then there's another video where um, they're looking into the data and how the data doesn't add up and doesn't make sense. I'd be happy to send you these links. I just don't have them memorized. And like I said, I'm kind of like looking into this now. And
Yeah, I mean, I've seen these stories, and like you said, I mean, Trump basically there was an interview where he said, "Yeah, we rigged it," or something to that effect. I mean, like he was so casual about it, like it was nothing. I mean, was he being serious? Was he playing with people? Was he admitting it and not caring? To what extent was it actually done? I mean, what I've heard, and again, you know, I'm a journalist, so I have to see pretty, you know, confirmed proof before I'll put my hand up and say, yeah. So, as far as I'm concerned, the jury is out on this. Do I believe it's possible? Oh, for sure. I mean,
yeah,
it seems the crux of it is somehow Musk was able to do something. But again,
yeah,
it's like you know, it's funny sometimes. Like when I post things on Facebook, if I see something on a really far left site, but I even if I know it's 100% absolutely accurate, I won't repost it. Isn't that crazy? You know,
yeah,
it's almost like I wanna. It's like I'm a journalist, so I still have that instinct. I'm a journalist before I'm a say
yeah.
Democrat or a progressive. You
I
know,
just want the Democrats to be brave enough to look into it.
right? Well, it should. Well, they can't
If
though.
they
How
were
can they now?
Republicans, they would be all over it by now. Like this happened, this happened, this happened, and it definitely was rigged. Um, Democrats are afraid to seem at all like they might be believing in what could be a conspiracy theory rather than it could be a real conspiracy. So like you said, I'm just gathering all my information. I want to post it on Facebook, but I want to have more information. But from what I've seen, there's enough information out there that that indicates, and they came out and said it. If we came out and said it, don't you think they'd be all over it? Just
Yeah,
get them to
right,
look into it. Just
right.
have the bravery to look into it.
But
I
it
can't.
isn't going to happen because the Republicans are in charge of every branch of the government. You know, some people have suggested
I
that.
think you guys are
And
sounding an awful lot like the January 6th crowd right now. This is making me deeply uncomfortable.
well, here's what
Um,
I'll say about that: is some people have suggested that the reason that Trump did what he did in 2020 was to set up a situation where they would rig the election and make it so the Democrats would be fearful to bring it up to seem like they were being hypocrites. Look, let me just say this, Trevor. I like I said, I have no evidence of this, so I don't believe it. You know what I'm saying? But there is information out there, and you just wish somebody would just investigate it. You know what I'm saying? Do I believe it? Is it do I believe it? No. Is it
I
possible?
don't feel as
Yes.
though Republicans actually held enough levers of power to get away with rigging the election in 2024. Would I be tremendously shocked if we see some particularly corrupt things going on going forward now that Donald Trump is back and knows for a fact that losing his power again is possible? I think I'm more worried about the future than I
Yeah,
am
I
seeing any
agree.
evidence in the
yeah. No,
past.
I agree, and that's why I bring it up because I'm worried that they're already trying to rig the 2026 election. I mean, part of the reason is too we can't forget about gerrymandering, and we
Right.
can't forget about just throwing votes out, like in Georgia. They just got rid of 150,000 voters.
Yeah. North Carolina right now, what's going on there? I think too when we
Now
say
that's a
right,
real life
right.
stealing of an election. They're not doing it through shady rigging. They're not doing it because a billionaire has all the money. They're doing it out in the open with some very partisan judicial decisions.
Well, that's kind
Throw
of
out votes.
that is you could parse it as that's kind of rigging it. You know what I'm saying?
That is
You know.
that's like I'm sorry. I feel as though we, in a time like this, have a responsibility to follow very real, terrifying things like North Carolina and trumpet what we're seeing there instead of mentioning that there's a vague possibility of some conspiracy that we have little evidence of.
Okay,
Like,
I see. I'll play devil's advocate. So then,
Okay.
why would Trump and Musk both say it? That yeah, we rigged it. I mean, were they just playing games? So I'm just playing devil's advocate for a
I
moment.
think he
I
says a
agree with you.
lot of stupid things, man.
What? I missed that.
He said, "I think Trump says a lot of stupid things."
Oh, well, that's true. But I'm gonna have to go soon because now I'm worried about my mom. She's been laying down for too long.
Okay.
She's laying down this whole time, and when she lays down for too long, when she gets up, she's very disoriented. And
Okay. Well, this has gone longer than we thought because it's been such fascinating conversation
yeah,
talking to documentary filmmaker Jen Senko. It's always great talking to you. Uh,
thanks, Steve.
we've been doing this for a while now in
Yeah,
different mediums. So,
yeah.
and you know, we'd love to have you back on again. We'll see where we are 6 months or a year from
If
now if we
Trevor will
still
have
have
me.
free speech.
Yeah.
You know, at WUSB, I mean, it's a community radio station. It's all volunteers, and it's all kinds of programming. There's no commercials. You know, there's no corporate overlords. You know, we don't have to deal with stockholders, and so there's many different voices on the station. And so this is a new program. It's a sort of a news and public affairs program, and from time to time, I'm going to invade Trevor's space here and talk about the media because it seems so important, and it's been what I've been involved with so many years as an author and a journalist. And you know, we are in a very strange time, as the Doors, Jim Morrison said, strange days. So thank you again for being with us. And do you have any projects? We'll leave with this. Do you have any projects coming up that we should know about?
My biggest project is my mother
Okay, that's
taking
a
care
good
of her.
project.
And I'm just doing these podcasts, and I'm in film festivals, and I'm writing things. I can't really commit to like a another documentary right now, not with my mom.
Okay. Jen Senko, thank you and continued good luck and keep doing the business that you're doing. It's important.
Thank you, Steve and Trevor.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jen.
guys so much for having me. It was nice to be with you.
Okay.
Great conversation.